This is the hereliesmetal podcast, a podcast that brings you the origins, history, and culture of all things metal. Once again, I am your host, Maledictus, and today we're going to do something different. As you see, my co-host and wife, Samantha, is not here today. She's not doing this episode because the subject matter of it, what it involves, is something she did not experience in her life. It really doesn't have any meaning to her. She really can't add to it. So, I was pressed to go on this historic episode alone, on this quest of history alone. Now, this is going to be a very different episode from our usual review episodes. We usually do reviews of sort of obscure bands from around the world, which is, I think, is very useful. But today we're going to be doing a historical piece on not an obscure band at all, probably, in fact, the most famous metal band, almost one of the most famous rock bands in the world right now, and that, of course, is Metallica. Now, we usually don't do sort of mainstream subjects like this, but we're going to take a little detour this time, something I want to talk about because it means a lot to me. Of course, what we're going to be talking about is the elephant in the room of the metal world right now, which is the 30th anniversary of the Black Album. Do you feel old? Yes, comment down below if you feel really old, because I do. This was 30 years ago, and I'm going to talk about my experience when it came out 30 years ago, and how it affected my personal metal development in my metal direction. Now, let's go back to the year 1991. What were you doing in 1991? Were you even alive in 1991? You might have not been if you're watching this podcast, but I was, and maybe some of you out there were. When the Black Album came out, it was released on August 12th, 1991, and this was Metallica's fifth full-length album, following the infamous Justice for All album, you all remember. This is arguably the album that you could say secured their permanent position ever since in the mainstream of not only metal, but in rock music in general. I mean, Metallica is probably one of the biggest bands in the world right now, transcending all types of music, really. I mean, Metallica is a band these days that frequently works with pop acts. I mean, that's when you're a legend. That's when you're basically Led Zeppelin, right? I mean, look at all the non-metal bands covering Metallica. Like, Weezer just covered Enter Sandman for the 30th anniversary. I mean, there you go. That's proof right there. The Black Album, when it came out, it was a lot of controversy. It was a dramatic turn from their usual sound, their thrashy sound of their four previous albums, and on top of that was a more scaled down approach, in contrast to Justice for All, which was almost proggy in a way. I mean, Justice for All had like movements in it. It was probably the most complex album ever. And that was all because of their new producer they had assigned to this album, named Bob Rock, who was famous for doing bands like The Cult, Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, things like that, a very different sound. So he, I think, put Metallica in a direction that really would affect their career forever. He would really open them up to a lot of more commercially viable sounds, and that would really send Metallica on like a rocket ship to superstardom. Another thing about one personal observation about the Black Album is, upon listening to it, was you can hear the bass in it, and that was a controversy back then that I pointed out as a musician back then when I was 14, listening to Justice for All. I was like, hey, you can't hear the bass in this. Is there a bass? And I always wondered, they got this new bass player, Jason Newsted, and you can't hear him, and that meant a lot to me back then. It really kind of made me think a lot. That's obviously a normal controversy today. It's something people discuss all the time about Metallica, about Justice for All today. But back then, that was a subject matter. For me, anyway. Maybe a lot of other people weren't talking about it back then, but I remember clearly, I've been talking about it for 30 years, okay, and beyond, that you couldn't hear the bass on Justice for All. And on the Black Album, suddenly there was a bass, and I was like, wow, that's the bass, and, it's not bad. They really recorded a very, usually doing for the reviews, they're really specializing in the recording methods and quality of these albums we do. The Black Album was a very consistently recorded album. It had balance between all the instruments, and everyone kind of had a part in there. It wasn't James and Lars kind of competing with each other, having a pissing contest. So either one of them could be heard over everyone else. I mean, everyone kind of got a shot. Everyone kind of got writing credits in that album. It was like, hey, we're a band. Everyone should participate in this. So I think that helped a lot, and that might have been really a result of the production of Bob Rock, making them act more like a band than, you know, a dictatorship with Lars and James at the helm. So how did this album affect me personally? That's what I want to talk about here. How the Black Album 30 years ago affected me, you know. And, you know, comment down below how it affected you. In 1991, Metallica was my obsession. Like I said before, you know, it wasn't Slayer or Celtic Frost or anything like that. You know, I hadn't discovered those bands yet. It was just Metallica and Megadeth, pretty much. That's all I really needed. And I wasn't into the other thrash bands. I wasn't really into Exodus or Testament, you know, or Death Angel. And I'd heard these bands, and I'd listened to them on WSIU. And WSIU would play a lot of thrash songs because this was really like the last hurrah of thrash in 1991. Thrash was really at its heights. It was at its most powerful point ever. And, you know, as I've said before, it wasn't until the Clash of the Titans concert featuring the Big Three, which was really Thrash's last major battle, and after that it was kind of downhill for a lot of reasons. Now, Metallica, during this time in 1991, this was important to me because it got me through my teenage years. You know, I started listening to them maybe around maybe 87, 88, and I was naturally terrified of their sound at first. It was my brother that introduced them to my older brother, whose friend at school had introduced him to metal. He gave him a few metal tapes, and Metallica was one of them. And one day we'd play Justice for All. We put it on our stereo, and on came Blackened. And that guitar intro kind of scared the shit out of me. I've never heard anything like that. I was terrified of it. I was terrified of a lot of things as a kid. Going to Catholic school, you know, you were conditioned so that everything that did not sound like unicorns and Jesus scared the fucking shit out of you, and that was me. It scared the shit out of me, and somehow it grew on me. Previously, you know, I was scared of it. I was raised on a diet of like Motley Crue and Aerosmith before that. You know, I was listening to Permanent Vacation from Aerosmith. I thought that was like hard rock. You know, I thought that was like the edge of rock and roll back then. So, you know, and then suddenly you go from that to, you know, slowly I was getting introduced to Black Sabbath as well, which I also thought was really evil. You know, those doom sounds. I'd never heard anything like that. You know, of course, everyone's saying at that time Ozzy was a devil worshiper. You know, didn't help. You know, I was afraid of bands being devil worshippers back then. You know, listening to like Judas Priest, you know, hearing Judas Priest back then, I was like, oh, this, you know, this might have subliminal messages in it because that's what they said on TV. You know, when you're a Catholic school kid, you believe all this stuff. Eventually, I discovered the other Metallica albums. You know, like, oh, Metallica has 3 other albums. You know, and I listened to those, and I kind of like those. Those hit me a little easier than Justice for All, because Justice for All was kind of just.
How shall one say director?
Too many notes, Your Majesty.
Exactly. Very well put. Too many notes.
Okay, and it was very intimidating for me. The songs were long, but you know, I remember listening to Kill 'Em All, and I liked that right away. I was like, oh, this is more my speed. This is simple, like rock music. You know, this is simple. I like this. You know, and of course, Ride the Lightning was probably my favorite album back then. You know, Fade to Black. What could be a better like emo song for some depressed teenager that had no friends? Fade to Black. That's just your anthem back then, isn't it? So I thank my brother, my older brother, who introduced me to this life. And ironically, today, you know, my brother, being an old man, has no recollection of any of this metal that, you know, that he was so passionate about. I mean, I'm telling you, he was passionate about this stuff like you wouldn't believe. And today, like, if you would ask him, oh yeah, remember that Metallica album? He would just be like, huh? Because he's just been so just trodden down by life that, you know, this stuff, this passion means nothing to him. And, you know, it's opposite with me. I remember all these days clearly. If I remember anything from the past, it was my love of metal back when I was a teenager and how it got me through things. Being the Metallica fan I was, and listening, and being out of Metallica albums to listen to, only 4 of them, you know, which naturally made me turn to Megadeth because they had albums coming out, and you could also hear the bass on them. So I was like, oh, I like Megadeth too. Like, you know, this is also cool. You know, I wasn't like Metallica's better than Megadeth. You know, I thought they were both good in their own ways. So naturally, I was always waiting for this next Metallica album. Of course, Justice for All comes out, 87, 88, and Black Album comes out in 91. So it's only like a couple of years. And, we used to think that was so long back. That was an eternity back then. But today, like what Metallica albums come out like every 5 to 10 years, if at best. I would basically listen to the Metallica albums all the time and the Megadeth albums on my Sony Walkman. I would ride my bike around the neighborhood and listen to them. That's what I did back then for fun. That's what we did back then. We'd go out and ride our bikes without helmets and practically get killed, but that's what we did. It was fun. So you all remember. Comment down below if you lived in these dangerous times, as they say. One day, it was the summer of 91. It was June. It was after school was either ending or it was over, and I was home after school just watching MTV like kids did back then for some reason. And they used to play normal music on MTV back then. Is there still MTV? I don't have TV. I don't know what goes on the television. Do they still do MTV? Comment down below. But anyway, it was MTV. It was in the afternoon or something, and I just turned the TV on, and a video comes on. It's very stroby, and it's just starting up, and it's playing the riff. This sort of guitar arpeggio riff, and to me, I thought, believe it or not, it was there was a song. I used to listen to WSOU a lot at the time, okay, and this was a time, 1991, 1990 was a strange time in metal because there was a lot of grunge music being played. There was a lot of music from Seattle being played. There was a lot of funk metal being played. And it was a band WSO used to rotate heavily, and I really couldn't stand it, but they were called Mindfunk. And they had a song called Welcome to something. I should look it up. Welcome. But it sort of started with a similar riff, sort of like a guitar sort of arpeggio, played in just single, clean, non-distorted notes. And I thought this was a video for that song, since that song was really popular at the time. I thought, these guys made a video for that. And, about 5 seconds into it, 10 seconds into it, the little name tag, the little information graphic flashes on the bottom of the screen like MTV videos used to do. And there it said, Metallica. It was here. But I hadn't heard, there was no warning that this would happen. There was no internet back then where you would hear on the Metallica website, we're dropping this video on this day, will you stay tuned for it? It was just there. There was no expectation. I didn't know when this was coming out, and all of a sudden it was there. Imagine the excitement. I think in few times in my life have I experienced excitement like that. I was just in shock. Metallica was back, and they were playing this strange song that sounded nothing like anything on Justice for All. So, and I couldn't even comprehend what was going on. All I was like, there is Metallica in this stroby video directed by Wayne Isham, sorry. I couldn't comprehend what was going on with the video. It was just, I would just remember all I wanted to do was tell my brother that the Metallica video, it's out. They're coming out with a new album. And, obviously we didn't know when it was coming out right away. We had to kind of seek out that information on, from the magazines or I think they probably even told you on MTV when that was happening, if I recall. And anyway, we found out the date it was coming out. But usually, when they release a video like that, there's a single out too. They usually a single tape, and of course we got that right away, and we were listening to that in our car. We played it probably 1,000 times. And the single, of course, had a flip side of Stone Cold Crazy, a cover by Queen, which I had heard Metallica made. I had heard that in the metal press somewhere, and I'd wanted to hear that, and I was really impressed with what they did with that. So we would just listen to that tape over and over again, in my brother's car, until, of course, the album were to drop. Now, it wasn't until August 12th of that year where the album dropped. This was still before, this was still the summertime, before I started school. And it was an interesting time because it was a transitionary period in my school career. I had gone from between 8th grade and freshman year. However, my freshman year was going to be in a new high school in a new town. It wasn't Catholic school anymore. It was public school. So it was going to be a big change where I didn't know anyone. So it was going to be rough. I was going to need Metallica during these trying times. It was going to be the most important thing for me. The album comes out on that day, on August 12th. And we knew it was out. So that morning, my brother had driven, he left me home and he drove to the nearest record store at the Wayne Hills Mall, which is no longer there. I believe it's they probably built condos over it, but it was the place where everyone would go back then. If you lived in that area. That's back when there were malls, right? And I think it was like a Sam Goody or something where he got it. And he had purchased the CD and the tape and the cassette tape. Why both? Because we didn't have, our car did not have a CD player. That was kind of, if you had a CD player in your car in 1991, you were kind of cool. You were kind of rich and cool. We didn't have a Discman either with a little tape adapter. Discman, I think so many Discmen were around back then, but they probably costed a lot of money. They weren't something just some teenager could have, So we got the tape so we could listen to our car. And the CD. And the CDs, of course, came in those big, long CD boxes, so no one could shove them in their pockets, whereas like just having a long box, which, I guess kind of worked. I don't know. And speaking of the box, as you know, in our usual music reviews, our Too Many Notes music reviews, we usually do a pretty detailed critique of the artwork of every album we do. So why not do this 30 years later for Metallica, the Black Album? So there's the box. It's black. It seems to have a sort of a faded out gray logo on the upper left-hand corner, and on the lower right-hand corner, what seems to be a Gadsden snake. But otherwise, the album is all black. And it wasn't officially called the Black Album. It was just called self-titled. It was called Metallica. But it quickly earned the name Black Album, which has stuck ever since. Now, when you open the sleeve of the CD or the tape, besides all the info and the lyrics, there was an image of the band using sort of a spot color gray over the black. It wasn't like a gray, but maybe it's more of like a warmer gray with a little bit of small percentage of red and yellow in it. As a color expert, I can give you the numbers, the breakdown of the CMYK breakdown, and images of their faces of the four band members, James, Jason, Kirk, and Lars. The first track, of course, was Enter Sandman, and we'd heard that a thousand times. But the second track, Sad But True, was this slow, tuned down, heavy song, and that was a huge departure. We're like, whoa, this is just slow. There was nothing really like that on Justice for All. And it was tuned down. The only time Metallica ever tuned down before was with The Thing That Should Not Be. So Metallica wasn't really one of those bands that played with tuning. So this was something new for them. And that was like, whoa, that's different. And, that was automatically kind of a favorite of ours because it was so kind of heavy for Metallica standards anyway at the time. We weren't familiar with doom music at the time, really. That wasn't, we wouldn't get into that until later. Third track, Holier Than Thou, which is still kind of a thrashy song for the Black Album. Now, by 1991, Metallica was becoming less thrashy. Like the thrash was far turned down on the Black Album versus, say, like Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets. I mean, Metallica was never really a thrashy band the same way like Exodus was a thrashy band, or the same like a way that like DRI is a thrashy band. Like Metallica and Megadeth aren't that thrashy. They have thrashy like songs, but they're not generally that thrashy. And a lot of people call Metallica thrash, but they only have a number of thrashy songs. It's not like Slayer or Exodus or like a lot of Anthrax songs, like mid career Anthrax songs, like Among the Living and stuff. It wasn't. They didn't have that street sound. They had a much bigger, sort of more responsible sound, if you will, and a more sophisticated sound. So. So Holier Than Thou was still kind of thrashy for them. It was simple and thrashy. And I was like, all right. But then, track 4, where Metallica would usually reserve their ballads. They would usually put ballads on track 4 or 5 in all their albums. They had a system. Metallica was very stubborn. They were very rigid with their system. And that's where you'd put the ballad, the power ballad. And it was The Unforgiven. And we've never heard, the guitar sound, that sort of melodic guitar part. I've never heard anything like that. And the singing, when they would sing the chorus, I was like, is that James Hetfield singing? Because we always knew James Hetfield with this kind of like a raspy kind of... It was this gentle voice, and it was like, what the fuck? And we didn't hate the song. Like maybe some hardcore Metallica fans heard that and they just shut it off and threw it across the room. But we were like, what is this? I know, and of course I loved it. I was like, this is cool. It almost sounded sort of almost like a spaghetti western kind of song, which I always kind of dug. So yeah, like that was a huge departure, and we were liking this album so far. There wasn't anything like we were so happy to have Metallica, like so many like hardcore say like young Metallica fans at the time. Maybe the older, more bitter guys that have been listening since Kill 'Em All were like, all right, I'm done with this band. That's it. You know. The real like, hardcore Metallica fans were done like by Ride the Lightning. You know, I know some older guys that are like, I was done by Ride the Lightning. That was it. You know, when I heard Cynic and I heard Fade to Black. But as this album went on, you know, some songs were they were very different. Wherever I May Roam, you know, starts with that sort of sitar-y kind of part, which is just, whoa, this is just a very different sound for them. And it was simple. There wasn't tons of complicated solos. Wasn't a lot of guitar, like those Thin Lizzy-like guitar harmonies that they like to do. It wasn't like 50 different guitar parts going on. It was simple. And I kind of like that about it. You know, it wasn't like load simple yet. We weren't there yet, but, you know, it was on its way to there. But, you know, it's very bluesy in a way. Metallica kind of has this chord progression between A minor and E minor, and they kind of just go back and forth, which is a really, as a musician, it's a really bad habit to get into following that, because your musical writing abilities become so limited if you're just following that A to E minor metal transition. You know, you got to move beyond that. Metallica really, I think they pollute a lot of people's musical ability when they try to mimic Metallica, because you're kind of stuck in those two chords, and it's not a good place to be. I think it's a bad habit to get into. It works for Metallica because they kind of sort of pioneered that, but you know, I think it really limits you. If you get Metallica in your muscle memory, it ruins your guitar playing. That's just me, though. If you like that kind of thing, I guess it works for you. But enough with that rant. As the songs went on, you know, Through the Never, which is a little bit thrashy kind of too. Then another ballad, Nothing Else Matters. Have you heard? I never, you know, Metallica had done sort of powery ballads before, Fade to Black and stuff, but Nothing Else Matters. It's almost like a love song almost. And it was like, what? Metallica has feelings? What the fuck? And we didn't hate it. You know, we were like, whoa, this is just, you know, as the album went on, Wolf and Man, which is, you know, very Kirk Hammett kind of song, horror movie kind of song, which he likes. The God That Failed, you know, starts kind of with a bass part, and then you know, which is like, well, they're letting Jason Newsted start songs, and then My Friend in Misery, where he has that sort of more complicated arpeggiated kind of bass intro, and it's like, whoa, they're gonna let Jason Newsted do things and stuff. Wow, that's amazing. You couldn't even hear him on Justice for All. He wasn't even there. Now he's like starting off songs. So, and then Struggle Within, which is, you know, kind of like I don't know, that wasn't one of the best songs. You know, the album had hits and misses, but for the most part, as the years went on, there was almost a video for almost every song on this album. And of course, the tour from this album, if you remember, the Black Album tour just went on for like 5 years. It just never ended. And I think it put Metallica on the absolute mainstream because they just became so popular. Everyone would go to these concerts, and also really just made them, it kind of like took them out of their sense of reality as well, because they just became super wealthy rock stars after this. And, you know, I think they just never landed. I mean, eventually they would kind of learn, you know, and kind of find some ground. The ground was a lot higher than our ground, but, you know, they would never be just normal people ever again after the Black Album. They would never come back from that. You know, it probably just accelerated James Hetfield's drinking problems to legendary levels. You know, probably made Lars do all kinds of extra cocaine, and, you know, because just this fame, like, how can you handle it? You know, how would you handle this fame? Would you just handle it normally? I don't think so. These are just normal guys. Suddenly they have rock star, like Led Zeppelin like fame. I mean, you know, hotel room smashing fame. So how do you even handle this, right? So yes, this album was a huge departure in Metallica's sound. That was very clear to us. So that was my experience when the Black Album came out. It was something I could never forget, even though it was so long ago in 1991. It's something that changed my metal life, my existence, and my metal in my life. You know, this is how it really affected me. This is how it really shaped my life and my whole metal career. It hasn't changed since then. Over the years I had gotten, you know, in and out of metal, but it was always there, and it was always because of really that day in 1991. I would, of course, grow up after that. You know, as the years went on, my brother was getting into more forms of more, like, less mainstream kind of metal bands, and he, of course, introduced me to bands like Merciful Fate, which was, of course, one of my favorite bands. You know, the King Diamond, to bands like Guar, which that was real depart. It was like, whoa, what is this? This is crazy shit. And I wasn't, of course, by that point I wasn't scared of bands anymore. So I was like, give me the hardest stuff you got. Bands like Carcass, bands like Trouble, bands like Candlemass. My brother introduced me to all that. Typo Negative, Carnivore. These are bands that really shaped my next phase in metal. And by that time, by the mid or late 90s, I didn't want to hear Metallica anymore. I'd seen them a couple of times in concert, and I didn't want anything to do with them anymore. They were supposedly coming out with this double album, and I couldn't give a fuck. And when, of course, Load came out, I heard it, and I was like, whoa. It was like, yeah, okay, I'm done. I don't even care. I don't care that they cut their hair. I don't care that they sound like Nickelback now. I don't care. The 90s were, it changed a lot of things in metal. Like I said, thrash was kind of on its way out by the mid 90s. Like after the Clash of the Titans tour, I think thrash was really asleep after that in the mainstream anyway, because thrash was pretty much mainstream by the early 90s, and it was gone. I mean, no one wanted anything to do with thrash anymore. Bands like Typo Negative are out, things like that. Of course, Pantera was out, which I never got into. I never got into Pantera back then. It just wasn't for me. But that was that was the mainstream of metal at the time. It was, it turned into Pantera. And bands like the Big Four, Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica, and Anthrax were kind of they weren't doing that well. Metallica was obviously doing the best still. Obviously their tours were still pretty big, but the rest of them were not. The rest of the 3 out of 4 were not really doing that well. They were kind of struggling. And Metallica, in a way, for their abilities, they were kind of struggling. Load gained them and lost them a lot of fans at the same time. I remember my friends who were extreme Metallica fans, they know who they are if they're listening. I'll never forget this. I always tell this story. They were members. I mean, they were far bigger Metallica fans than I ever was, and that's how I became friends with them in high school. Early in high school, I met them, and I was like, well, I was wearing a Metallica shirt one day, and they were like, you're into Metallica? And I was like, yeah, kind of. I was like, yeah, kind of. I was kind of getting out of it back then, but it was on my way down. My Metallica high was on its way down, but when they had heard Load, they were so disturbed by it. They were so disappointed that Metallica had cut their hair, and they'd seen the Till It Sleeps video and the sound of it. They burnt their but one of them he burnt his Metallica membership card and sent it back. I thought that was, even at the age of like 17 or whatever, I was like, what is wrong with this? Like, that doesn't matter. But yeah, they were in mourning, like if somebody died when they heard Load. Me, I didn't listen to. I didn't give a fuck about it. Though I do remember the internet was kind of becoming a thing. There were like websites, and I remember hearing this new Metallica song was come out, and I didn't care. I just wanted to hear it because I wanted to hear how bad it could have been. So I remember finding a download of Metallica playing like it was 2x4 live, and it was kind of like this this song that they would kind of start playing during the Black Album tour. This is what's going to be on the next album. I found it, and I remember showing it to everyone, and I remember they were kind of like disappointed by it when I showed them the live recording of it. I was like, here, listen to this. This is Metallica's new song. And they were already kind of like, this sounds very disappointing. And then of course when the album came out, they were very disappointed. And like I said, I didn't give a fuck. I was going to Carnivore reunion shows at that time. I was seeing Merciful Fate at small fucking clubs in New Jersey back then. Imagine that. Merciful Fate was supposed to headline Psycho this year. Hopefully next year they will. But back then I saw them on small stages at the Wetlands or at Studio One in New Jersey. And no one gave a fuck. And those were the good old days. That metal is just what it was back then, because it was hardly an internet to really prop it up. You kind of just had to know about it. And Metallica's really ultimate downfall was when they came out with the Saint Anger album, of course. And you saw, of course, the Some Kind of Monster movie, and that's like movie is so like kind of hard to watch that it seems almost staged, almost how they are with each other and what the conflicts are in the band. It almost seems like it's staged, right? It's like, how could they have, can they really be reacting this way to each other? And that was to me like the lowest point of this band. It's like, when I saw that, I was like, they're gonna be, that's it, they're broken up, that's it, they're done. And of course, it was like another 8 years till they came out with Death Magnetic, and that was like they're back. I think Rick Rubin had done that album. And usually when Rick Rubin does your album, it's like sort of your comeback album. So it was like, whoa, this is they're kind of back in a way. I mean, the music isn't, it's not like like, whoa, but all the Metallica fans were happy again. They were like, oh yeah, this is good. And I remember seeing them on tour, and actually having enough money to be up front now. Now I could I can afford to be in the front row now, and I remember seeing them and just being amazed how positive James Hetfield was, how he wasn't a drunken, vulgar truck driver up there like he had been in I'd seen the Black Album tour many times. As they toured so long, I must have seen him 3 or 4 times on that tour, and I remember just what a horrible cursing person James Hetfield was up there. He was just angry and fuck you and drinking, and every other word out of his mouth was fuck. But now he was like, hey, I want you all to feel good. Do you all feel good? And I was like, whoa, what happened to this guy? Why is he so positive? It's kind of freaking me out. But he's off the alcohol, and that's what happens when you find God, I guess. And even James Hetfield was nice now, so that was kind of funny. But so that was that's I went on a little bit of a rant there, but that's my experience with the iconic Black Album, which came out 30 years ago this week. So yes, I know you all feel old, and I want you to tell me about your experience with this album, or any album that came out fucking 30 years ago. There's a lot of albums that came out 30 years ago, and what it still means to you. And to me, will I listen to the Black Album now? If I'm going to listen to a Metallica, it's probably not going to be that one. That one's, I look back and that album's kind of doesn't have that effect on me. It doesn't have that excitement on me. It's kind of boring in a way. It's not. It didn't age well with me. With some people, it's obviously forever, but it didn't age well with me. So that is my experience with that album. I hope you'll enjoy my little rant here about an experience, about a day in history that shaped my life in metal, and why I'm here today giving you the Here Lies Metal podcast. It's all because of this day, really. It really is. So thank you for watching, and comment down below if if anything in here, you have any questions or you have any comments, and any hateful comments that you usually have. But how can you hate this video? I'm not trying to offend anyone in this video. So I know when I do the news, some of you guys you kind of get really I talk about I might mention some sort of controversial subject about the guy from Iced Earth being in jail, which is just hilarious, but that offends some people for some reason, even though the guy broke the law. So anyway, but comment down below and tell me about your experience with this. Thanks for listening, and find us on social media, including Twitter at Here Lies Metal, Facebook at Here Lies Metal, Instagram Metal Lies Here, and give us a shout out on Gmail, hereliesmetal@gmail.com. And make sure to hit that subscribe button as you do, and hit that thumbs up so it improves our algorithm, as they say. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.